31st of May, 1918. In the heat of battle, a lowly German dispatch runner put his life at risk when he saw the chance to become a hero. But this was no ordinary German soldier. This was Adolf Hitler.
Hitler is being sent up to Battalion HQ with a vital message. On his way, he comes across a unit of French soldiers. Hitler pulls out his pistol. They all put down their weapons, and Hitler frog marches them into captivity.
It was a daring capture of enemy troops by a single man that won Hitler the Iron Cross First Class, one of the German army's highest honors. There's just one problem. The story was a lie. It was the first of many tales of self-promotion and deceit from a man who would stop at nothing to fuel his meteoric rise to power. Hitler. Who was the man behind the monster?
There were just so many parts of this story that didn't add up.
Teenage loner turned national hero.
He was the Messiah for the German people.
How was he able to achieve it?
All of it was an act. All of it was a show.
This is the definitive guide to the most hated man in history. Adolf Hitler was not born a leader, but in just 12 years, the homeless dropout-turned-soldier would rise to become the undisputed head of a dynamic political party. Late summer 1914, and rare footage of an historic day. In Munich's Odeonsplatz, it was announced that Germany had just declared war on Russia. This is also the earliest known footage of Adolf Hitler. Aged just 25, a nondescript face in the crowd, captured on film. Fast forward 25 years to June 1940, and Hitler had marched his fatherland into a Second World War. Just 8 weeks after invading France, he led a triumphant parade in Berlin to celebrate Germany's historic victory.
It's like a scene out of Imperial Rome with Caesar coming back. Flowers are being thrown everywhere, people are Sieg Heiling. It's just the most incredible sight. And of course, Hitler is loving it.
The German people, who were understandably nervous when he launched that offensive, they're now believing this guy, he's really got something.
For the German people, Hitler was raising their country to the top of a new world order. A pledge they bought into, partly on his reputation as a hero, earned on the battlefields of the First World War. But recently discovered documents reveal the truth about Hitler's early years was very different. Spring 1913. 24-year-old Hitler left his Austrian homeland to avoid conscription into the Austro-Hungarian army.
Hitler grows up in the Austrian Empire, where identity is increasingly governed by questions of race. Are you German? Are you Jewish? Are you Slav? Hitler, quite early on, identifies himself very much with Germanness.
Hitler has no desire to serve the Austro-Hungarian Empire in any military sense. His loyalties simply lie with Germany, which he sees as being the future.
Having fled Austria for Germany, Adolf was now a wanted man. After 8 months on the run, the authorities tracked him down in Munich and hauled him into court. There, he played the sympathy card, portraying himself as a struggling down and out.
The judge takes pity on him. Lots of other people are in Hitler's shoes, but somehow Hitler manages to wriggle out of it. And of course, this is Hitler at his absolute theatrical best, and it's a talent that he'll build throughout the rest of his life.
August 1914. Germany declared war on France. Hitler enthusiastically volunteered to join the German army. He was assigned to the 16th Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment.
He takes a crash course as a soldier, and within weeks he's on the way to the Western Front, and he is immediately thrown into battle. Hitler's regiment experienced a devastating baptism of fire. They are utterly unprepared for the realities of war.
Over 2,000 men were lost from Hitler's unit by the end of the First Battle of Ypres in November. But Private Hitler survived and received the only promotion of his career.
It is generally claimed that Hitler becomes a lance corporal or corporal. This is not true at all. He, in fact, becomes a private first class. And the reason why this matters is that he is still an ordinary soldier. He's not an NCO. His superiors do not see any kind of leadership qualities in Adolf Hitler.
And what's really curious is that although he's promoted quite early on, he remains in that rank for the rest of the war.
And with that promotion came a new role for Hitler: dispatch runner, relaying messages to and from units behind the front lines. Newly discovered documents from regimental archives reveal that Hitler's role was not nearly as dangerous as he went on to claim.
The reality is he typically did not have to run from trench to trench, that he typically did not have to take messages right to the first line. The men in the trenches think that men like Hitler have a cushy job. They think that, unlike them, they're not exposed to enemy fire. They think of them as an Etappenschwein, or as a rear area pig.
The rediscovered records also reveal another crucial discrepancy in the account of an heroic action by one German soldier, later used as evidence of Hitler's heroism.
As I was starting to read it, I thought, hang on, this sounds surprisingly similar to the Nazi propaganda account of the arrest of a group of French soldiers. But there was one crucial difference. The hero of the account in Nazi propaganda was Adolf Hitler, while the hero of the account in front of me was Hugo Gutmann, Hitler's Jewish officer.
Halt!
But Nazi propagandists would later erase Hugo Gutmann's name from the account and replace it with Hitler's.
Achtung! Adolf Hitler.
Near the end of the war, Hitler was awarded the Iron Cross for delivering a dispatch under fire, an entirely different incident.
As he's receiving the Iron Cross First Class, we can't help but imagine that Hitler is thinking, I finally made something of myself.
Fight!
He will wear this Iron Cross with pride for the rest of his life.
But for Hitler, the war came to a sudden and agonizing end. When the British attacked his regiment with mustard gas.
Poison gas, of course, is one of the most horrific aspects of the World War I battlefield, and Adolf Hitler gets a face full of it.
By the following morning, his eyes are absolutely streaming. He can't see anything.
Hitler was evacuated to a military hospital near the Polish border.
But the unit he's put into is not the eye unit, it's the psychiatric unit. And so what seems to have happened is that after these 4 long years of war, finally the pressure has got too much to him and he's had a mental breakdown.
After 4 years on the Western Front, Private Hitler's war had ended in failure. But the seeds had been sown for his transformation into the Führer. Adolf Hitler's passion for Germany was all-consuming.
In uns selbst allein liegt die Zukunft des deutschen Volkes.
Yet by birth he was an Austrian, born in the small town of Braunau am Inn on the 20th of April, 1889.
Hitler comes from a dysfunctional family. His mother calls his father uncle. Their first 3 children die in quick succession, and Adolf, the 4th child, is the survivor. She goes on to have more children, but the only other son, Edmund, also dies, and she absolutely dotes on her only boy.
But with his father, it's very different indeed. His father, Alois, is a very cold, elderly, distant man who regularly beats Hitler, and as a result, Hitler absolutely despises him.
Young Adolf lost himself in tales of cowboys and Indians by German author Karl May. These tales featured an Apache chief fighting for a better existence for his people.
Perhaps it is those novels of the American West that first take young Adolf out of this obscurity. He's being introduced to a fantasy version of the broader world.
When Hitler was 9, his family moved to the outskirts of Linz, the capital of Upper Austria. Here, Adolf dreamt of pursuing his great passion, drawing. But his father had very different ideas for his son's future.
Hitler's father is a civil servant, and when Hitler shows an interest in art and announces that he wants to be an artist, his father is absolutely furious and says, "Never in my lifetime."
Forbidden from studying art, Adolf was sent to a technical school with a focus on maths and science.
Hitler is not a good student, but there is one subject that seems to excite his curiosity and his interest, and that's history. It is a certain kind of history. It is tales of the great heroes of the German past, the heroic kings and emperors and conquerors.
Adolf's deepening German nationalism only added to the growing rift between father and son.
His father clearly identifies with the empire, with the imperial project, with the Habsburg monarchy, whereas the young Hitler is clearly attracted much more to ideas of pan-Germanism, thinks himself as German.
But the sudden death of Hitler's father in January 1903 meant 13-year-old Adolf became the man of the house. Four years later, in 1907, he left his doting mother and ventured to the capital, Vienna, where he hoped to enter art school. He persuaded his only friend, August Kubizek, to join him. And there they indulged in a shared passion for opera.
Hitler becomes enormously attracted to Wagner.
What Wagner represents is a kind of mythological, pseudo-Germanic past. And so when he goes to Wagner, it is imprinting upon him an idealized form of society that is entirely rooted in myth.
But this fantasy world was very different from reality, as 18-year-old Adolf discovered after taking the entrance exam for Vienna's most prestigious art school.
The feedback he gets is that his drawings of buildings are actually quite good, but he's unable to draw people.
He thinks it's child's play to get into it, and when he is rejected, he sees it as, quote, a bolt from the blue. It hits him, and it hits him hard.
Furious over the rejection, he vowed to reapply, but young Hitler's world was about to fall apart. Christmas, 1907, and he rushed home to Linz to be with his terminally ill mother.
The scene around Clara's bed is just incredibly poignant. You have a woman there lying, dying of breast cancer. She's in a lot of pain. They have this incredibly strong emotional bond, and Hitler is literally watching not only his mother dying, but also that emotional bond just disintegrating right in front of him.
Adolf was inconsolable, despite the support of Dr. Eduard Bloch, the family's loyal Jewish doctor.
Dr. Bloch observes that he has never seen someone so overwhelmed with grief as Adolf Hitler that day.
Bloch wrote, "It is natural that I should have witnessed many scenes such as this one. Yet none of them left me with quite the same impression. In all my career, I have never seen anyone so prostrate with grief as Adolf Hitler."
It is perhaps an example of the extreme emotions that Hitler suffers for the rest of his life. His inability to come to terms with setbacks when he faces loss and disappointment.
Between 1907 and 1909, we find Hitler on a downward spiral into essentially what we would call a street person in Vienna. In 1909, he actually spends Christmas in a homeless shelter.
Adolf Hitler was a broken man. With his dreams shattered, he looked for someone to blame.
What we find happening is a burning sense of resentment at the bourgeois middle-class world which had rejected him and which had failed to see his genius.
While living in the homeless shelter in Vienna, Adolf was beginning to have his head turned by the people in power.
One of the politicians that clearly influences Hitler quite a lot is the mayor of Vienna before the First World War, Karl Lueger, right-wing mayor. He admires Lueger's ability to understand the nature of the crowd in front of him, to get the pulse of the crowd.
Hitler's later claim that his revulsion toward Jews began in Vienna at this time in his life was pure fabrication.
He has Jewish friends, he deals with Jews when selling his art. There is no evidence that Hitler had any run-ins, had any negative feelings about Jews prior to the First World War.
Hitler's account of his years in Vienna would be fictionalized over time to serve his political agenda, as were his recollections of the First World War, which ended in humiliation when Germany surrendered in November 1918.
He finds scapegoats, Jews, socialists, pacifists on the home front. He begins to speak of a stab in the back of the German army, rather than what actually happened, which was a battlefield defeat.
Hitler's anger and resentment grew, but soon he would realize he could channel it into politics. He had a cause, and it would bring the world to its knees. September 1934. The moment of glory Adolf Hitler had fantasized about for the past decade. He had become Germany's savior. Addressing over 700,000 supporters at the Nazi Party's annual Nuremberg rally, he put on the performance of a lifetime.
Wir stehen fest zusammen für unser Deutschland und wir müssen fest zusammenstehen für dieses Deutschland.
After the death of President von Hindenburg, Hitler merged the office of President and Chancellor, becoming all-powerful as Führer, with support from 90% of the public.
Denn in den Zeiten hinter uns, da habt ihr mir eure Treue tausendfältig bewiesen. Und in der Zeit vor uns kann es nicht anders sein und es wird auch nicht anders sein.
It's extraordinary to consider how great his rise will be from a park bench in Vienna to the Führer of the Third Reich.
"15 years earlier, at the end of the First World War, Hitler recovered his eyesight and was released from the psychiatric ward. He returned to Munich, where he was one of thousands of soldiers facing an uncertain future after Germany's defeat.
Hitler's in a state of relative aimlessness at the end of the First World War, like many other German soldiers. Hitler is like a stray dog who needed a master, someone who needed a cause, a sense of belonging that he had lost.
Though Germany's forces were disbanded, Hitler remained on the army payroll and was selected for a special propaganda course.
Hitler is one of those who was chosen by the German army to speak to small groups of returning soldiers about the future of Germany. To disinfect soldiers of their Bolshevik propaganda, especially recently demobilized soldiers.
Hitler threw himself into the program, stumbling upon the defining talent of his life, public speaking. He was a natural performer with a compelling style. This caught the attention of the local army unit's chief of propaganda, Captain Karl Mayer.
Karl Mayer immediately sees in Hitler someone with a natural talent for speaking, who would speak in simple, approachable terms, and therefore could address other soldiers and ordinary people.
By the time Hitler was caught on camera, here at a right-wing rally in May 1919, he had been recruited as an informant. One of his first assignments was to infiltrate and monitor extremist political groups emerging in Munich. Hitler was sent to spy on a radical right-wing group called the German Workers' Party.
As all political meetings in Munich in this period, this one takes place in a rather surprising environment, in a beer hall. Hitler's not very impressed with what he sees, a half dozen or a dozen people speaking about the issues of the day in a not very educated way.
Hitler interrupted a debate on Bavarian separatism to lecture them on the importance of Germany remaining strong.
And in withering rhetoric, in rising volume, he talks about the sacrifice that he and the other soldiers have made for Germany. And it wasn't for Bavaria, it wasn't for a state, it was for all Germans.
When Hitler starts to speak, it's like a switch going off inside him. He suddenly realizes that everybody in the audience is hanging on his every word. And the leader of the party, Anton Drexler, says, "My goodness, we could use him."
Hitler was asked to join the very party he was spying on. Believing they were in sync with his own ideas, he accepted.
It's a radical party, and Hitler sees himself as a rather revolutionary figure, somebody who's going to shake Germany up from below, not somebody who's going to sit on committees and say we should do this, we should do that, somebody who acts.
In October 1919, Adolf Hitler delivered his first official speech to the German Workers' Party. A pivotal moment he later recounted in Mein Kampf.
I spoke for 30 minutes, and what before had simply felt within me, without in any way knowing it, was now proved by reality. I could speak.
Hitler quickly became a member of the party committee, recruiting followers with his fiery propaganda.
There are plenty of people around who are receptive to his ideas, who are strongly anti-communist, who also have views about the Jews, who also think that Germany has been stabbed in the back. So in that sense, Hitler always has his hand on the pulse of the public. What's interesting is that Hitler doesn't yet see himself as the savior of Germany.
Hitler left the army in March 1920 as membership of the German Workers' Party soared and a leadership fight developed.
Hitler's now become a major figure in the party, and he doesn't agree with the strategies of Anton Drexler. He resigns in a huff and threatens to storm off. But in the end, the people around him come to realize that there is something special about Hitler, and that they're going to exploit those special qualities. And the price for doing so is to accept Hitler as leader.
July 1921. Hitler announced he was rejoining the newly renamed National Socialist German Workers' Party and was made its leader.
For Hitler, socialism is the socialism of the race. So National Socialism means not only the revival of Germany as a nation, it also means a social revolution.
Hitler drew from his days as an aspiring artist to create a new banner with an ominous icon.
Hitler is extraordinarily invested in the smallest minutiae of the visual. He takes the swastika, which was around beforehand in some far-right movements as early as 1907, but he makes it fundamental to the Nazi image. He's very smart. He knows that he's not going to suddenly make all these nationalists pure Nazis overnight. So what he wants to do in the choice of the colors, the black swastika against a white disc against red, he takes the colors of the old German Reich.
In 1939, Adolf Hitler was dressed to impress. His image had been meticulously crafted to say he was not merely the leader of the German cause, but the embodiment of it. Creating Brand Hitler was the cornerstone of his success, and it began in his earliest days in politics.
In the early 20s, Hitler is an incredibly elusive figure. Very few people have actually seen photographs of him, so there's this mystique and aura which is deliberately being built up about Hitler. And this is all coupled in with this nickname that he's got for himself, the Wolf.
To build support and funding for the fringe Nazi party, Hitler gave himself a makeover. But his attempts to cultivate a public image to match his high aspirations fell short, and he was mockingly called the King of Munich.
As a party leader in Munich, it's Hitler's job to mingle with those in high society circles, and he is completely inept at it. He lacks table manners. He's utterly gauche. He pours sugar into his wine. He doesn't know how to hold a knife and fork properly. He gobbles cream cakes off the plate before others have had a chance. He holds a dog whip and taps it against his knee as he speaks. It's clear he's still searching for a way to mingle with the rich and powerful.
Hitler was a long way from the comfort of a German beer hall, but his common touch was about to pay off. In 1923, Germany's failure to pay its huge war debt to France, amounting to billions in gold marks, threatened to bankrupt the country, triggering a financial meltdown.
1923 is a year of crisis for the Weimar Republic. The government is printing money 24/7 in order to meet its obligations, but everyone knows what that adds up to: inflation.
Before the war, it was 4 marks to the dollar, and it's going to get much worse. Before long, it's going to be 20,000 marks to the dollar.
With the economy in freefall, desperate Germans were rapidly losing confidence in the democratic Weimar government. Hitler took to the streets, inspired by an event the previous year in Italy.
Hitler is very much an acolyte of Benito Mussolini, an admirer when he makes his first grab at power. He's modeling himself very deliberately on Mussolini's March on Rome in 1922.
It's a statement of violent nationalism which has brought Mussolini to power. And this is very attractive to Hitler. You don't have to bother with all the ballot box waiting. You can just get on the street, march to the capital and say, "Give me power."
In November 1923, Hitler marched to one of Munich's beer halls, accompanied by 600 of his party's so-called stormtroopers. There, Bavarian Prime Minister Gustav von Kahr was addressing a crowd of 3,000 that included some of the state's top politicians.
He's armed himself with a pistol, immediately gets everyone's attention by firing a shot into the ceiling.
Hitler, as only he can, announces that the national revolution has begun.
And there's massive cheering in the hall, and it's at this point that Hitler thinks, do you know what, I've pulled this off. 3,000 people in this hall, and they're all convinced that actually this change of government is going to happen.
The next day, Hitler led a 2,000-man march through Munich to take control of the city. The government ordered an immediate response.
They are fired upon by a cordon of army and police units. Marchers to Hitler's right and to Hitler's left are killed, but Hitler is miraculously left untouched.
4 police officers and 14 of Hitler's fellow Nazis were killed. In the chaos, Hitler escaped and hid at the home of friend and Nazi supporter Ernst Hamstengel. For the 3rd time in his life, Hitler had been hit with a devastating setback.
He spends 2 days there, in the blackest of moods. He's toying with his pistol. Hamstengel's wife talks him out of killing himself. But it's clear to Hitler that the putsch has failed, the party has been shattered, and that he himself has become something of a laughingstock.
The following day, Hitler was found and arrested.
As the arresting officer comes to take him away, Hitler insists that his Iron Cross be pinned onto his lapel. In his most despondent moment, this is still a man extraordinarily concerned with his own image.
Hitler's vision of saving Germany was now viewed as a joke. For attempting a coup, he was charged with treason and faced the death penalty.
This is not a jury trial. It's an administrative proceeding overseen by 3 judges, all of whom had been appointed during the old imperial period, and all of whom had at least some sympathy for Hitler's patriotic goals.
Hitler turns the courtroom into a platform for his views. What he says is recorded in the local and national press.
He is allowed to speak at length. And of course, it is in that very act of speaking that Hitler realizes he still has power.
Hitler, in a way, breaks through at his trial because now he becomes more visible to Germans. Now he's able to distill his message of hate and resentment and persecution to the Germans.
Hitler was found guilty, but the judges were lenient. Spared the guillotine, he was sentenced to 5 years at Landsberg prison.
The time that Hitler spends in Landsberg prison is very important. It's a time when he's forced, really, to sit and start to think out more about his political strategies. It's clearly, for Hitler, I think, a critical moment in which he suddenly realizes that he's reached the point where he has to define himself politically.
The failure of the beer hall putsch could have been the end of Hitler's career. Instead, it was a new beginning.
He receives a steady stream of guests and visitors and well-wishers who bring him all sorts of gifts, who bring him all sorts of food. Hitler has and will have for the rest of his life a notorious sweet tooth. He actually puts on a few pounds.
From his cell, he dictated to his trusted henchman, Rudolf Hess, what would become Hitler's infamous autobiography, Mein Kampf, My Struggle.
Interestingly enough, he does not write the book himself. Mein Kampf is a man pacing around the room, blurting out whatever pops into his head at the moment.
Mein Kampf is an interminably boring book. It's so boring that it makes you want to gouge your eyes out. It's just a terrible read, but important if you want to understand the sources of Hitler's ideas.
Hitler tells us in Mein Kampf what he's going to do. That he is going to declare war on the Jews, that he is going to destroy the Jewish population of Europe, that he is going to upset the balance of power in the world.
The language in Mein Kampf about the Jews is shocking even today. Maggots and parasites and cancers living upon the body politic of the various European nations.
He's really starting to believe that he can shape the world according to his will.
I think we have a real sense with Hitler now that he no longer sees himself as a drummer. He's going to be the one to lead the German people. He's going to be the Messiah for the German people.
After 9 months in prison, Hitler was released early for, of all things, good behavior. But in his absence, dissent had been brewing inside the Nazi Party ranks. Hitler now faced the toughest challenge of his political career, and his strategy to retain his leadership would prove to be as inspired as it was ruthless.
If he fails, he absolutely knows it's game over.
December 1924. Adolf Hitler was released from jail and returned to Munich. His Nazi party was in chaos, and the Bavarian government had banned him from playing his trump card, public speaking.
For an orator and a demagogue like Hitler, this is a huge handicap.
Hitler decided to switch tactics. He no longer sought revolution, but change from within Germany's Weimar government.
The fiasco of the beer hall putsch has convinced Hitler that revolution in the old style is impossible. He comes out of prison determined to act legally.
His first priority was to shed his gangster image. The challenge of rebranding Adolf Hitler fell to a former paparazzi photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann, an ally who greeted Hitler as he emerged from Landsberg prison.
Together, Hoffmann and Hitler try out lots of different poses, lots of different costumes, if you like. One of them is Lederhosen. And when they see the contact sheet of all the images of Hitler and Lederhosen, he sort of scrubs them all out, puts red crosses over it, and just thinks he looks silly. Hitler will never wear Lederhosen in public again. And it's at this point when Hitler starts thinking of mutating into becoming more of a statesman-like figure.
Those who know him are shocked by the change. Adolf Legalité, some of his friends mockingly call him. Legal Adolf.
Hoffmann took over 2 million photos to perfect Hitler's idealized image of himself. Hitler wanted the many photos he didn't like destroyed, but Hoffmann kept them, and they survive to this day.
It's so interesting that Hitler had such a vision of what he wanted his image to look like that he actually took photographs of him trying out different poses for his speeches. I mean, this was a short little man with a funny mustache, and yet our iconic image of him is of this large, charismatic character. All of it was an act. All of it was a show. I'm so intrigued with his particular posture. Look how large and expansive it is, how this arm goes away from the body and forms into a fist, which is a symbolic weapon. Looks like you're about to attack. Hitler knew that. Hitler knew that if he expanded his posture and put out a symbolic weapon, he would rouse the audience to feel that strong emotion of danger and anger.
Hoffmann's photographs were only part of Hitler's political overhaul. By February 1926, he turned his attention to the next obstacle in his path, those challenging his political authority.
One of his closest followers, Gregor Strasser, has more or less formed a breakaway party in the northern districts. Hitler has to bring him under control. But he also has to prove to the men in Munich that he is still the leader.
Hitler summoned party leaders to an emergency meeting in Bamberg. Nazi senior members from across Germany attended, including Gregor Strasser. There, Hitler demanded his party's unconditional loyalty.
It's a do-or-die moment for Hitler, really. It's a moment when Hitler's got to reimpose his authority over the party.
Hitler takes a deep breath and then starts on what he knows is going to be the most important speech of his political career. Hitler now feels confident enough to deliver that knockout blow, which is to demand loyalty from every member of the party, including Strasser.
At the end, the 60 gather around Hitler, swear an oath of allegiance to him. The party is once more united, and once more under the firm control of its Führer, Adolf Hitler.
This is the first sign of Hitler being utterly ruthless. As a result of Bamberg, his self-belief just skyrockets, and he feels he's now well on his way to being the man that Germany so desperately needs.
Hitler had stamped his authority on the party, but one member was not convinced. Joseph Goebbels.
Hitler has realised that Goebbels has the communication skills, the propaganda skills that he wants for his campaign, and he's determined to woo him.
He takes him to Munich, he takes him to Stuttgart, he gives rides to Goebbels in his car, and he basically charms Goebbels into following him.
After the Bamberg conference, he clearly becomes convinced that Hitler is the leader that they need, that he is the person who will revive Germany's fortunes, and he switches his support.
Goebbels, who kept a diary throughout his life, writes in his diary, "I love him. I stood next to him. He spoke to me. He gave me a photograph." And from that point, Goebbels is loyal to Hitler until the death.
At the party's next conference at Weimar, he revealed his new image. One which would soon spark a deadly cult of personality, with Hitler as self-styled Führer.
One of the interesting things about the title that Hitler chooses, the title of Führer, is that it doesn't just mean a political leader, of course, and he doesn't intend it to mean a political leader. A Führer is a kind of guide, a kind of prophet figure.
He stretches out his arm in the salute, which will, from then on, become the calling card of the Nazi Party.
The Heil Hitler salute that greets him everywhere is now compulsory, and it just shows that his grip, his authority on the party is iron strong.
In just 8 years, Adolf Hitler had risen from a common soldier to the undisputed leader of a dynamic political party.
Certainly, he has gifts, a kind of rough personal charisma, public speaking, political organization. But there's also a certain ruthlessness and a willing to move against those who stand in his way.
In 1927, the ban against Hitler speaking in public in Bavaria was lifted.
Hitler once again can be in the public eye. At last he's got what he needs, a public platform.
Hitler had honed his skills and perfected his image, and he was now ready to unleash them upon a struggling Germany and an unsuspecting world.
Perhaps never in history have the man and the times been so closely aligned. And of course, the stage is now set for Hitler's rise to power, not just in Munich, but over all of Germany.
Just don't nick your Eurovision song from anyone else. Always a good lesson to learn and learn again. Father Ted, next.